It's time for the UNX News. Extraterrestrials, time anomalies, dimensions, remote viewing, UFOs, UAPs, and USOs, ghostly encounters, abductions, Bigfoot, and more. Your end of the week news source for everything unexplained. Here is your host for the UNX News Podcast, Margie K.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to UNX News. I'm your host, Margie K., and this evening we have another good show for you. I do want to mention a couple of things coming up that are really important, and I know you don't want to miss. Coming up in July in Texas, the MUFON Symposium with, of course, Robert Solis is the keynote, but they've got some very interesting things that were just announced, and I'm going to be doing a special report on that over the weekend, and so watch for that on Monday next week, because there's something very special that's going to be happening on that at that time. And then the Contact at Sea, I will be speaking along with a lot of other great speakers going to be on this event. It's very unusual. Cruise to Alaska. And I've been on Alaskan cruises before, and they are my favorite out of all of the cruises I've ever been on. But this is going to be very special, and I cannot wait. The seats are filling up very quickly. There's only a few left. So if you're interested, please go to contactatsea.com and get registered. Then, of course, don't forget our own UNX Network XCon Into the Rabbit Hole. This will be our third conference, and it is in Springfield, Missouri at the very haunted Oasis Hotel. We're going to have a lot of fun at this conference, and registrations are open now at unxnetwork.com. My guest for this evening is Marilyn A. Hudson. She is a retired library professional and administrator. She's a writer and researcher and author of several books on the UFO UAP phenomenon. She's a member of MUFON and a field investigator with Oklahoma MUFON. And I know Oklahoma is very busy. So welcome to the program, Marilyn.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I'm so glad you could join me this evening. Our listeners may not know that you've got a couple of articles in UNX Magazine, and one of them's coming out this month, July 1st. And it is about some of the best documentary films. So you did a really good job. If anybody's wondering what to watch, check that article out.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, well, Marilyn, how did you get interested in UFOs?
Well, I used to always just say that it was something that always interested me. But the secret was that I actually had some experiences when I was a child. And I kind of kept those to myself because where I grew up in Kansas, you didn't mention doing anything out of the ordinary.
Oh, okay.
So I, like everyone else, I didn't want to be labeled as being that person. And there was a part of me that just, wanted to not talk about it. Mm-hmm. But over the years, the things just kept staying. I had what I called amber memories. They were little memories. They were like encapsulated episodes of some scene, some action, some event. And they never changed. It was always just like it was frozen in a hunk of amber. And it would just keep coming back. They never had a beginning. They never had an end. It was always just that moment in time, forever frozen. And so I wondered, was I going crazy? Did lunacy run in my family? So finally, when I got to be, a more mature individual, shall we say, I decided that if this thing had really happened, that there should be some ways to find out. Somebody else must have seen something. And so I began to look at where I lived, the time period, the events, and one thing after another, just it began to build. And I found that there was some apparent support for the events that I had remembered. And I was able to support that with some research that I'd found. And along the way, I heard these people say, "Oh, nothing ever happens in Oklahoma." So we
Wrong.
don't have any of that stuff. But so I said, well, let's just take a look at that. And so I began to look through the online files of Project Blue Book. Looking first just at Oklahoma. That was my new adopted state. So I was really interested to see, well, what has happened? And I began to just make a note of all the incidences, all the stories, all the events. And before you know it, I had just all this stuff. And I said, I just need to put it in a book. And so I put it in Saucy Saucers, 1947 to 1969, Oklahoma UFOs. And so that was the first UFO work that I did. And it was so well received that I began to put together a second volume. And for that one, I was lucky enough. I had 8 or 9 people that contacted me with stories. I've never shared this with anybody before.
Mm-hmm.
Can I share this in my book? Yeah, don't use my name, but you can share that story. And so I've got some wonderful firsthand, never before shared stories in the second volume that's called Unimaginatively Saucy Saucers Volume 2.
Well, it works. I love the Saucy Saucers. That's very clever. And now anybody in MUFON knows that Oklahoma is a hotspot for UFOs.
That's right.
But the general public probably doesn't know that.
No, there is a growing number of people that are aware, and they're listening with a little bit more willing ear to stories and stories that people say that they had experiences 20, 30, 40 years ago. So slowly but surely, there is a new atmosphere and tenor that's being seen. But there's still a lot of people. One of the things.
The recent information coming out of the government, the Pentagon releasing, there are things out there we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
We can't explain it. Do you think that has anything to do with people's willingness to speak up on the topic now?
I think it has everything to do with it. I think that the ridicule and the denigration that people had experienced in the past, whenever they talked about that kind of situation, was they looked to the government to give them a clue as to how they should treat and respond to those statements. And so when the government said, "Oh, well, they've just been drinking," or there's hoaxers, or there's pranksters all around, or they just can't tell a cloud from an airplane. So I think that we've always looked to the government, we've always looked to the news to tell us how we should view certain subjects. And so as a result of that, what's happened is that as the government now has begun to say, we think that we should be looking seriously at these topics, at these subjects, that's being heard, and people are responding to that. There's not the automatic jokes that there were 20, 30 years ago. There's the honest, well, I don't know what it was we saw, but there was something. There's a lot more believability. People are being trusted a little bit more to actually be telling the truth rather than just making up a tall tale.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever had somebody say to you, "No, I've never seen a UFO, but there was this one time," and then
Yeah,
they go into a full description of a UFO
yeah.
classic close encounter, uh, but
I'm not
before
saying
that,
it
they
was
weren't
UFO,
admitting.
but
Yeah, exactly.
exactly. That's yeah. I've heard that numerous times, numerous times. And
But
I've had people sidle up to me at festivals and events and places where I've spoken or something like that, and they'd say,
hmm,
"I don't really believe in UFOs or little green men, but I saw something one time." And so they're at least becoming a little bit more willing to share some stories as well. But the last 50 years have trained us very well.
yes, yes, indeed. Let's go back to your own experiences for a minute. Can you dig a little deeper into that? Give us some more detail.
Sure. I had 3 or 4 significant amber memories. The very first one that I can remember is I was sitting in my living room on the floor in front of these windows. It was night. We were getting ready to watch our favorite show, which probably was Gunsmoke. My father loved that. And so I was sitting on the floor just coloring away, and I looked up into the window that was just right beside the floor there. And there was this face looking in at me. And it was very pale, very quiet, didn't have any hair. All I could see was just this pale face. And it looked at me, and it seemed like very large eyes, but a lot of the face was a little bit in shadow. And the first thing I thought really was it was probably one of my brothers or something, playing a trick. But about that time, I hear my father and my brothers coming in the back door. So it wasn't them. And when I turned my face back around to the window, the face is gone. Now, the next major little memory that I have is of me walking home down our street in a late gray fall type of afternoon. The leaves were wet. The bark was black with damp, and the leaves were kind of yellow and gold, and the brightest thing in the image with this overcast early fall day. And these 2 people are following me, and I cannot get away. They're not moving like normal people. They have very fluid, wavy kind of motions with their hands as they're following after me, and I'm like I'm in molasses. I can't seem to move,
Hmm.
and I know that I need to get just a few more 100 feet, and there's be my house, and I can go in, it'll be safe. But that's it. Just that moment to the next moment, and that's where the memory ends. Now, the next summer, I am riding my bike down this killer T-bone street, and I have been warned not to ride my bike, but I'm riding my bike. And it hits the curb, and I bounce into this 10-foot chain link fence. And as I'm peeling myself off of the fence, and I'm sitting there in the ground by my bike and trying to pull myself together, I see I have this scar on the back of my leg, just above my knee. And it looks really strange. A child at school had stitches, and it looked like that same kind of healing wound, but it had only like about 4 dots, 2 on one side, 2 on the other, at different ends of the incision, you might say. I was curious. What happened? I ran home and I asked my mother, I asked my father, I asked my brothers, I asked my sisters, my aunts, my uncles, my teachers, anybody. When did I get hurt there and have to have stitches?
Mm.
And nobody, I was never hurt. I never had stitches until 4 or 5 years later. Strange.
Wow.
The next thing that happened was I remembered that we heard something outside, and my entire family, my brothers who were older, teens, went out the screen door into the backyard, and the backyard was bathed in this red light. And I'm edging my way through, these jean-clad legs and trying to get through so I can see something. And I get out there in front, and everybody has stopped, and they're staring straight up. And there's this huge round circle of light that the center of it is this hot yellow white tone, and around the edges is this red orange combination of lighting. And the entire area for about 10-15 foot radius is bathed in this hot yellow reddish tinged light, and everything around it is just dark. And nobody is saying anything. And I look up at everybody, and they're just like frozen and looking up there. And I look up then, and that's all that I remember. The final episode, at least the final episode that I know of, is about a year later. It's I think it was about 1965, perhaps 66. And I have 2 photos that show that my father and my mother and I had driven out to the local lake. It was probably about April, still cold enough to wear a sweater. And there is a picture that shows my father or myself pointing up at something in the sky. And my father just standing there, just kind of looking at me like, child. Nobody can remember us going to the lake that day.
Ooh.
But what I remember is, I remember walking down this sandy road there at the lake with the tall trees on either side, see the lake in the distance. And it felt like they had put a clear bowl over everything. It was like there was no sound, nothing, no sounds, no wind, no birds, no insects. I couldn't even hear my feet walking through that sandy road. And there were people in cars, and some of the people were half in and half out of their car, but they were frozen.
Whoa.
It was like I was walking through a tableau of mannequins. And no one can remember us even going to the lake that day. I've, showed them the pictures. And I was like, okay, tell me about this day. I don't remember that. Nobody could remember going to the lake that day. Even though I could remember that we'd gone because my mother was going to check about buying some chickens from a lady who lived out that direction. And so we thought, well, we're out there, we'll just go around the lake. But nobody else could remember that.
Mm.
So those are the things I just kind of put under my hat, and wondered whether I was going crazy, whether there was insanity in my family, which luckily I haven't found any yet. But when I began to search, I thought, okay, if these things actually happened, if there was something that went on in my community during those time periods, in those general years, surely someone else would have noticed. Someone else would have reported something somebody else would know what would have happened. And so I began to search, and sure enough, I found that there were several episodes during that 2 or 3 year period in my hometown, in my home county, in that region of my state of Kansas, where police, military, weather radar, witnesses left and right saw objects, red glowing objects, things that moved and did not make sense and moved in strange directions. And then I found an undocumented story from a woman who was probably about my age. And she had lived in the Bartlesville, Oklahoma area. And she had reported on one of the databases, bulletin board kinds of things, that she'd had an encounter at about, she thought it was 65. There was a UFO. She thought there was an alien. She thought maybe there was an abduction. There was definitely some missing time. And I thought, she could be talking about me. I've searched and I've asked people if they know of anybody who had such a story, but I've yet to find them. So if there's anybody out there, if you're that person, please contact me, because I would love to compare some notes about what had happened and what the experience did to you.
How can people contact you, Marilyn?
I have a wonderful website called UFO. I'll just go ahead. Here's my email address. I'm going to live dangerously. Marilyn A. Hudson at yahoo.com. Can't get much easier than that.
Okay, perfect. So anybody in Oklahoma or Kansas?
Please.
Right. So we're talking about time period of 1965.
63 to 65.
Okay. What county is that?
Sumner.
Sumner County. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
I found stories out of Wichita, which is just Sedgwick County just to the north, and Cowley County to the east, and then to the west also. There were many instances and reports of sightings in that time period.
Have you ever been regressed or hypnotized to try to capture some memories?
No, I never have.
Is that something that you're interested in doing?
No, I wouldn't be adverse to it. Get to the bottom of something and, find out, am I really crazy? Or
Yeah. Yeah, I've had several regressions, and I was able to get more information during each one. So, but some people aren't ready for it. You strike me as a person who could handle it, but some people really don't want to know, and they're not ready to learn the truth about everything because it's so foreign and alien. No pun intended.
That's right.
It's a shock to the system.
Yeah. I did a story program one time where I shared some of these stories and everything for a local library, and I called it the UFO Catch and Release Program.
Oh.
I was a caught and release.
Yeah. Well, that is pretty much true what they do. That's what they do. What are some of the other interesting stories out of Kansas or Oklahoma that you'd like to share with us tonight?
Well, there's a fascinating story out of Kansas. Kansas actually has a lot more stories than I was really even aware of. My research has uncovered the fact that places like Kansas, places like Oklahoma, and probably several other states, we were receiving so much money for air bases, airfields, training facilities, missile silos, that kind of thing, that it became, I think, very easy for government leaders, city officials, state leaders. If the government said, we won't talk about this. It was their patriotic response was that they would not. And so as a result, you grew up thinking that nobody in your state had any such stories to share. But I found that was very incorrect. There's a story that was actually in Project Blue Book. It was, they didn't investigate it, but there was a clipping of a mysterious, large, dark, triangular object that landed in a field northwest or northeast of Wichita, which would have been north and east of McConnell Air Force Base. But it didn't land at the air base. It landed in a field. And there was so much light with this object that local fire departments and police and sheriff from 3 different communities and 3 different counties were all responding to these reports because they figured that something had crashed and they had wildfire running amok. And so they were searching all over these country roads trying to find where this thing had come down. Mm-hmm. And then finally one young sheriff's deputy came across it, and he observed it from a distance, and it was standing, he thought, 10 feet above the ground. It seemed to have 3 different legs. It had a strange bright blue-white light associated with it, as well as a purple light. And it was just very un-aircraft type of report. Mm-hmm. And although it could have been, some kind of an early stealth prototype or something like that, why didn't it land at McConnell? Those are some of the questions that go unanswered. And then suddenly, about 4:00 in the morning, that thing is gone. The police that have been watching it don't even see it leave, according to the news article.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of one of those things. All right, it's in there yesterday, but you can't find any follow-up on it. Nothing shows up afterwards to explain what that was that they saw. So I've always kind of liked that one just for the sheer mystery that's involved with it. But probably when it comes to Oklahoma, one of my favorite ones
I'll tell you what. We've got to take a short break. When we come back, we'll hear a little bit more about Oklahoma and what's going on there. We'll be back right after this. Hey, UFO conference enthusiasts. We've got another great event for you in 2024. The Saucers and Aliens Kansas UFO Day in Dimension G is being held in the UFO capital of Kansas, Geneseo, on July 6th. This is a fun festival in the middle of nowhere. There will be a parade, decorated yards, costumes, vendors, speakers, and a showing of the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still. Appropriately, an 8-foot-tall statue of Gort and a statue of Plateau will be dedicated. This will be the only museum in the U.S. with these custom-made statues. If you'd like to donate to the statue project or attend the event, visit GeneseoMuseum.com. That's GENESEO Museum.com. Be sure to bring your camera when you attend the event. That's GeneseoMuseum.com.
This September 6th through the 13th, join with like-minded souls in the experience of a lifetime on the Royal Caribbean Ovation of the Seas as we travel from Seattle to Alaska. Internationally renowned researchers, investigators, experiencers, authors, holistic healers, contactees, spiritual luminaries will sail on an extraordinary voyage of transformation. This cruise will explore UFOs, alien contact, cover-ups, ancient mysteries, the paranormal, holistic healing, and spirituality. Experience engaging lectures, one-on-one sessions, private, custom-tailored excursions, and a nightly UFO watch. The cruise is booking up fast. Go to contactatsea.com and be sure to mention the UNX Network when you book. That's contactatsea.com or phone 336-749-1219. That's 336-749-1219.
And we're back. This is UNX News, and I'm your host, Margie K. I am speaking with Marilyn Hudson this evening, and she basically, Marilyn, do you stick with Kansas and Oklahoma as far as UFO study goes?
So far, that's been the primary focus. I do have growing files and interests in many other states because one of my theories is that we need to look not just at the particular state. Project Blue Book made that mistake. Everything was very localized. But these things had to come from somewhere. They had to go to somewhere. And so if you're wanting to try and really track what was happening, you have to be able to cross state lines, to ignore those state lines and see where it was that they might have been heading and what people in those other areas might have reported.
Yeah, and I know you're a MUFON Field Investigator, so am I, and we often find that UFOs don't really know what state lines are.
That's right.
And we're able to track them across not only from sightings, but now from the MADAR units. Do you have MADAR units in Oklahoma?
We have a few. We're just really kind of getting our toes in that water, and I'm really looking forward to what will happen when there's far more of those around, and I think it's going to be some fascinating data.
Oh yeah, it just adds one more piece of evidence, especially we've had a number of sightings in Missouri that I know for sure that have matched up with MADAR units, either showing readings that are off the scale, or in one case, there was a sighting that was local and my unit shut down, which was very unusual.
Yeah.
And then a couple of other units picked it up as it went across the state. So yeah, that's just another tool that we can use to track UFOs and show as evidence, since the MADAR only picks up UFOs. It doesn't pick up anything else. It's I think it's fascinating. So what are some of the other unusual cases? You were getting ready to share one with us before the break.
Yeah, there's a favorite one that I like. About 1966, there were three cadets with the Civilian Air Patrol. They were finishing up some of their training, and they reported something that they had seen. Now, the Project Blue Book file took their report, took their statement, concluded they had seen an airplane disappearing into the sky. But when you actually look at the witness statement that is there, the witness who answered the form drew a picture of what they had seen. And what they had seen was, yes, they saw some red lights that were moving in the sky. Check, could be an airplane. But they saw those red lights disappear into this large, black, paddle-shaped space of nothing high in the sky. That blocked out the stars beyond it. And the shape was very much like a hot water bottle or one of those cutting board paddles that you might see. It had the rounded corners, big rectangle with this kind of an opening area that stuck out just a little bit. And that's where the red lights disappeared into. But that gets hidden because nobody got to see those parts of those files. They only usually got to see that conclusion on the front page. And so the conclusion was nothing to see here. They just saw an airplane and misidentified it. But no explanation for what it was that blacked out the sky for such a wide area and that the objects disappeared into. So
sounds like a mothership to me.
That's one I really like. That's one I really like. Now, one of the stories that someone shared with me, sometimes you kind of feel like a spy, working undercover. Yes, I promise I won't use your name. But
Right.
this fellow, after some discussion and sharing, he finally agreed to let me share his story. And it was about 2017, northwest or northeast Oklahoma, in the area of Osage County, near Hominy. Hominy is an area that has. He was driving home, as was his custom, and he would stop once he'd crossed the main highway. He was about halfway home, and he'd always stop on his way.
Oh, you're cutting out, Marilyn. I can't figure out exactly why.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. We got you there.
Okay, so he began to get out of his truck, look at the night sky like he always liked to do, and he smoked a cigarette before he got home, and he couldn't smoke at home. So he's looking up at that night sky, and he is just enjoying the beautiful view, and suddenly he sees this big glowing square object that is coming toward him, and it's fairly low. And that was what struck him. It was like a mattress flying through the air. It was, that kind of a shape coming at him with a slight glow. And so as it's passing overhead, it is close enough that he can actually see it has a sort of a pebble type finish to it. And he sees this thing crawling around on the outside of it that looked very insect-like. And that scared him to death. And it was very large. He said probably it was as big as, a man or a woman. And it scared him so much. He jumped in his car, locked his doors, and got out of there, like the proverbial bat out of you-know-where. And he's never gone back since.
Well, I don't blame him.
But that concept of seeing something insect-like crawling over the exterior part of this object, that sent chills up my back when I heard it. So I can imagine what it did, to him to actually see this. So I've always thought that one was a very, very interesting one, that I had never really heard one quite that. Nothing crawling over the outside of something. But
I have one such case out of all of them. so yeah, that's pretty rare.
Yeah. So that was really something. Now, the other one that I really love is one that's actually from here in the community where I live, here in Stroud, Oklahoma. In 1959, she was a young girl at the time. She was only about 12, I think she said. And her father loved the outdoors, and so they'd been doing picnics and camping all year. And she had fallen in love with the concept of lightning bugs. And so here it was early October, and so it was a beautiful, beautiful evening. And so she decided to go outside to see if there were any lightning bugs still around. And so she stepped outside, and when she did, she was enjoying the sky, and she looked up, and she was thinking about maybe, I could get my telescope, and I could come out here, and I could look at the stars. And so she's looking up at this beautiful blue sky that's still just a little blue. It's starting to darken. She sees these lights coming from the northeast. They're balls of light, and each one of them is like a pastel color, and it's edged around with this kind of a glittering, iridescent type of tone. And so she sees them come in. There's a pink one, a blue, and a green color. And following far at the end is this white one. Now, the colored spheres all come up, and they begin to go into a circle. And said she was reminded of a ride at the carnival. And she'd look up at the sky and she saw those orbs just going around in a circle. And she was so amazed. She thought they were just so beautiful. And her peripheral vision, she's seeing that there are other people that are stepping outside too. They're also coming out, and she says everybody was getting into the middle of the street and looking up at the sky to see these orbs dancing in this pinwheel in the sky. And that white one now has arrived, butts right between them and gets into the center of those other glowing orbs. And they begin to just dance around that white one. And then they do that for a few minutes, and everybody is going, what? And that white one moves out of position and begins to head toward the southeast. And following behind, just like dominoes, are the other colored orbs moving right behind that lead one away into the distance.
Oh, wow.
Now, her father was a city manager at the time. So the next day, he's on the phone to the military, the police, everybody he can think of to try and find out, what did we see? He never received any responses to his phone calls. Ever.
Oh, well.
But she remembered those lights. And I found 2 other people that also had remembered those lights. But nobody was willing to give me their name or anything like that. So it's still anecdotal to that point, but it was a fascinating story.
Well, I would say there's been a lot of sightings that are similar to that. We've had some big sightings in the Kansas City area that involve multiple witnesses and these balls of light coming out of, in one case, a tree line off of a major highway here. And one person started counting them. He counted 125, and they would go along a path for about a mile and then go straight up into the sky in the exact same place.
Wow.
And that was a big one. It made the news.
Yeah. Well, I always thought that was so fascinating because that was 1959.
Wow.
And it could have come from any video that's being, out there shared today of people seeing those strange globes moving around and doing strange things.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there are more sightings today than there used to be in the 50s and 60s, or are more people coming forward and reporting?
I think it's just more people are coming forward and reporting. I suspect because of the fact that every time I've looked into anything, there's always somebody else that saw something, always somebody else that is mentioned, but there's never any reports for those other people. Quite often the newspaper articles will talk about all the numerous people, and they may name several of them, but there's no file or report produced by any of those individuals that, like Project Blue Book, looked into or anything like that. So I think that probably just the way it is today, if somebody sees something, the chances are real good they're going to say, I'm not going to say a thing. I'm keeping that to myself. I don't want anybody to think that I'm crazy. I don't want to be laughed at. I don't want to be ridiculed. I'll just keep it to myself. And so I think that, I have encountered over and over again when I'm talking about this subject, when I'm sharing at a presentation or something like that, there's always 2 or 3 people there that can say, yeah, I've seen something like that. Never shared it, never told anybody about it at the time.
Yeah.
So I think that probably if we'd actually been trying to collect data of people who actually had seen things in a more scientific manner than what we did in the 50s and 60s, we'd probably have a different attitude or view to what is going on today. But we chose to not go that route for a variety of reasons of, political and national security and other things. But I think that probably people have been seeing the same things, and you've always got just that section of people that if you tied them up and poked them with a hot stick, they would not tell you that they had seen any such thing, even though they had. So I think that there's those people, the self-preservation is very strong with them. And so they do not want to make themselves vulnerable enough to share what they saw.
In doing your investigations and talking to different people, or let's say even when you're doing a talk, do people ever come up and say they had forgotten completely about an event that occurred and then something triggered their memory and they remembered a UAP?
Yes. I've had that happen 2 times. One gentleman, I was talking about some of the stories I'd collected about UFOs that were seen over the turnpikes in Oklahoma. Police, worker, turnpike authority workers, truckers, that kind of stuff had all reported these kinds of things. And when I was talking about that, and I was sharing with them the shape that they had seen and how it just had been a massive object that they had witnessed. And I had a gentleman say, well, I saw something like that. I didn't think it, I thought, well, I didn't know what I thought. But I saw something that did that exact same thing. I must have seen a UFO. And it was like A, B, oh, C. It took that long for it to kind of sink in that that's maybe what had happened, is that he had seen not just the strange cloud of darkness, but he'd seen actually a large black non-reflective UFO, UAP, whatever you want to call it. And the light bulb went on at that point.
Yeah. I've run into quite a few people that have something that triggers their memory, and it's happened to me too. I mean, I recently had something that triggered a memory from when I was 17 years old that the whole family saw, and I completely wiped it out of my mind. It was just gone. And who knows why that happens? Maybe it's a self-preservation thing. You just kind of block it. Your mind blocks it for you, maybe, because you were freaking out at the time. Have you noticed, I'm curious, are city people more likely to discuss UFO sightings than rural people? What do you think?
I think it really depends. There are some, having lived in both Oklahoma City and smaller communities, if you get the locals in a smaller community to trust you, they will share with you. If you run across people in a larger community who have the same kind of story, they will share with you. But you also will have quite a few more people that are just, okay, they're controlled by the larger group that they're with. So they're under peer pressure. They may, oh yeah, I believe in it, yeah, but you can tell they don't. Whereas that there's also those individuals that you can sense something going across their face when you discuss the subject, that that they'd really love to have the opportunity to say something and share something, but they're being held back by their peer group or the lack of trust in whatever the situation is. So I think it can happen in either group, large city people, smaller community people. Both of them have shared some really phenomenal stories. And some of them have also said, no, I'll never share that. I'll never talk about that. Never. So
Yeah.
I think it just depends on the person and the moment.
Mhm. Well, let's talk about your books. You've got several. So, was this your first book?
That was the first book on UFOs. I've written other books prior to that on other subjects, but this
Okay.
was the first UFO themed book, and it was part of that whole process of uncovering, my past. I think is what's here.
Okay, so that's Sooner Saucers, 1947 and 1969. And I just noticed a little ET standing on the roof there on your cover. That's pretty cool. And then Sooner Saucers Volume 2. And I've got this picture, Encountering Kansas.
Yeah, that's basically my story of events in Kansas that I struggled to uncover and remember and recall. So that's me just putting it all out there.
Okay. Did I miss anything?
There are three others. One of the problems that I found when I was doing research was that quite often the books that you read, they would lump all these different sightings together. When they happened, you had to really search.
Mm.
And so I decided that I would put together a chronology of 1947, because that was kind of where I started. Because I think it's important to see where and when things happened and what the response was to those events.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see that, you begin to see, yeah, they didn't really know what was going on. And they really are, their little legs are moving like pistons, trying to keep up and get ahead of this issue. And that gets lost when everything gets jumbled around. And so the chronology follows a kind of a January through December of 1947. And the title, those Saucy Saucers, that it's a quote from the general who was in charge of the Tinker Air Force Base in 1947.
Oh.
He was asked, a newsman had asked him, well, has the Tinker Airfield had any flying saucer problems or anything like that, And he, off the cuff, he shot off that, no, we haven't had any of those Saucy Saucers stop here for any maintenance of their saucers.
Oh, that's funny.
So I decided that deserved to just be remembered and placed into that title. So it's 1947, those Saucy Saucers.
Okay.
And then I think that 1965 is another pivotal year, that getting things put in a chronological order. If you do a web search for 1965, important UFO events, about the only thing you'll see listed anymore is Kecksburg in December.
Mm-hmm.
But I've subtitled this, the Summer of the Saucers, because over Oklahoma, Kansas, Wyoming, Nebraska, South Dakota, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, that summer, it was the summer of the cluster group of UFOs. They were reported in clusters. There were a lot of landings reported. They were just all over. And the Air Force tried ineffectually to explain away the fact that 100 plus airmen at the Cheyenne base in Cheyenne, Wyoming, witnessed groups of these objects over repeated evenings in the sky. And they had their name and their number and all that kind of stuff. In Nebraska,
Marilyn, I hate to say this, but we're out of time. I know I could talk for another hour easily with you, but thank you so much. How can people get a hold of your books?
They're available on Amazon. Most of them are available in Kindle and in paperback versions.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for being
Thank
with me on the
you.
show
I
tonight.
appreciate it so much.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.